Hi and welcome to the Co-Create podcast, sharing our weird and wonderful thoughts for the week. I'm Laura and today I'm joined with Sarah, our Myers-Briggs guru at Nicholas Associates Consultancy. So our hot topic this week is assessments, but what do we actually mean by that? I was actually talking to a family friend this week about personal profiling and assessments, and his immediate response was, I'd fail at that. And for me, that's mad, to think of StrengthsFinders or MBTI has such negative connotations. And how does this drive people to think like this? That in their heads, they've got that picture that these assessments are almost judging tools rather than tools to help personal development. So Sarah, why are you a Myers-Briggs fan?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think just to your point there, Laura, around this kind of negative connotation that surrounds these assessments, and I know you can't see me but I'm doing bunny rabbit ears, and I used to do a lot of Myers-Briggs board and director level, and again it's a kind of perception thing around. I would walk into the room to do the Myers-Briggs session, and bearing in mind these are people who are really high up in an organisation, and I'd walk into the room to do the session and straight away they'd go, oh, so you have my report? And I'd say, well, it's a questionnaire, but yeah, I have your report. And they'd say, oh, does it mean I'm a psychopath? And it was always, what's interesting, Laura, is it was always that phrase, am I a psychopath? And this is coming from, highly educated, highly intelligent, highly successful people. And the first thing out of their mouth before we've even started the session is, am I a psychopath? And of course the answer is yes, because we all have a tendency. Well, that's probably
what a response.
That's probably a topic for another time. But it's interesting that there's this perceived element of what do you know about me that I don't know about myself, and also this test assessment sort of language that we use, which I'm definitely not crazy about. So I think the reason I love Myers-Briggs, and I'm a big fan of it, is firstly it comes from a super credible place in that it's all based on Carl Jung's theory of psychological types. So his whole thought process is these types or preferences, again I'm doing bunny rabbit ears, preferences are kind of innate, inbuilt from the age of 2 or 3. So, really credible psychological background to it. And secondly, it's about the phrasing. So MBTI, Myers-Briggs type indicator. So it
doesn't say test at all in that, does it?
Exactly.
Yeah, very clever.
Yeah, so it doesn't say test, it doesn't say assessment. There is no right or wrong with Myers-Briggs, and I'll talk a little bit about the process as we move through. But the great thing about it is there is no right or wrong. There is no judgment. It's about a preference, and that's the key word, is that actually we all use all 8 preferences at different times in our lives, days, etc. So it is about a preference versus, a judging tool or an assessment or a test.
It's very interesting you say that with the preferences, because I've actually experienced a few friends say, oh, are you an introvert? Oh, that means you're not cool, you're not part of the crew, and for me, again, there's that misunderstanding of what those preferences are, and that there is still that perception that they are good and bad. That's kind of needs to be banished. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, really good point. And again, this is something I've come across pretty much every time I've run a Myers-Briggs session, and be that either a one-to-one or on a team level. And if we look at the preferences, so let's take, as you mentioned there, Laura, let's take extroversion and introversion, which is the first of the preferences. I think the key confusion here is that in our language today we use these terms.
We do, yes.
Yeah. So if I say extrovert to you or extroverted, what immediately comes to mind?
Outgoing, very talkative, very kind of speaks before they thinks.
Yeah, I'm very bubbly, I'm very outgoing.
That's me. Yeah.
I'm everybody's friend. And equally, when you say introversion, people have this image of sort of head down, won't look you in the eye.
It's someone in a quiet corner in a library, isn't it? That's the image that sparks to mind.
Yeah. And that's because of our wording today, our 21st century view of extroversion and introversion. But actually, when Jung was working on his psychological types way back, he didn't view extroversion and introversion the same way. So actually, it doesn't mean what we perceive it or what we think it means.
Yes, yeah.
So when Jung talks about extroversion as a preference, what he means is where you fundamentally get your energy from.
Yeah.
So if you have a tendency to, I shouldn't say, I'm just going to correct myself, I shouldn't say if you have a preference towards extroversion, is the correct terminology. So if you have a preference more towards extroversion, you will get your energy from other people. So you like to be around people, you are generally quite chatty, but they will give you energy. Now, the difference with introversion, and again, introversion is this, I'm in a corner and, I'm shy, don't say. If you have a preference towards introversion, you get your energy from yourself, from time out, recharging, quiet time. I have a thing called quiet time. So and I'll happily share, Laura, so I'm an I have a preference towards I.
Yeah.
And again, just to give an example of that perceived idea, when I've been running sessions, and again at director and board level, and I'll happily share my type, so I'll say I'm an I, and they'll go, no way, you an I, you can't be an I.
Yeah, they can't believe it. Yeah.
No, you stand up in a room and talk for a living.
Because I would have said you were an extrovert just on that first kind of judgment, and again, it's you shouldn't, it's that misunderstanding about what it actually is.
Exactly, and it's so important, and this is why Myers-Briggs is such a key thing, not only to do, in terms of a one-to-one for self-awareness, but for your teams as well, in terms of understanding what that means, and actually understanding just, pinning the label on somebody.
Yeah.
And actually the connotations of that. So, I have a preference towards I, but what it means is, I can stand up and facilitate a session all day, or, I've spoken to audiences of 300-400 people, but should I see you in the, hotel bar later on, chances are, Laura, I'm probably not going to come. I'm probably not going to come for dinner with you because I need to recharge.
Yes.
Because those people, I've given all my energy to those people. I don't get my energy from people, so I need to go back to my hotel room, order some room service, and kind of plug in and power up again with some quiet time. So it's always a preference, a leaning towards one, but it's never a I will stamp you with a
label,
it's not a label, it's a preference, and we can flex that as the example I've just given there. My job is an extroverted role generally, but we flex that and you learn different behaviours. So there's definitely an element of negative connotations or misunderstandings with some of the types that Jung created.
Definitely, and I think for me there's that piece of I'll happily share that I am an extrovert from the Myers-Briggs type indicator. Yet I think over the years, and as my job's developed from working from home, I'm actually turning more towards the preference of introversion. So I'm finding the new term coming through at the minute of ambivert. Hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting new phrase that's come through, and what does that mean? And again, is it about flexing your style, or is it that learnt behaviour, or is that another preference that should be added to the Myers-Briggs type?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's definitely one.
I've stumped you with that one, haven't
I?
I
think the ambivert question is probably one for another time. That will probably rage on, I think. For me, and the way and the way Myers-Briggs should be looked at. So again, if we take E and I, extroversion, introversion, and again, you can't see me, but if you can imagine a scale, and E and I is at either end, it's you fall somewhere on that scale.
Yeah.
So if E and I are at either end, and there's somewhere in the middle, and I just, as an I, actually, when you look at my questionnaire results, you will see that I am literally one tip over onto I.
Oh, that's interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So actually, whilst I am an introvert, and again, we're going into a bit more detail, but whilst I am an introvert, it's a low preference. So whilst it is my preference, it's fairly low. So if you think again about that scale, it's fairly easy for me to flex over here, and I've just moved backwards, by the way. over here, I flex backwards into my extroversion, and I can do that quite easily because actually I'm somewhere in the middle or potentially ambivert.
Yes. Yeah.
So for me, I like the term. I think it's valid, but I often think of that as flexing your style or your preference.
Yeah.
And that's really important in our day-to-day for a couple of reasons. It helps you work together, team build, avoid conflict, all the other stuff.
Yeah.
But the other reason it's quite important, I've seen a great example of some of the directors I used to work with at another company, and you get, and I am generalising here, you get a certain type at board and director level, and there's a very good reason for that.
Yeah.
You know, they are where they are for a reason. So you get a very specific general type at that level. And I worked with a director who kind of booked that trend a little bit, and I hadn't done her Myers-Briggs, but I had an idea based on working with her, spending time with her. And we were talking about Myers-Briggs one day, and she said, "Oh, what is yours?" And I said, "Okay, I'll tell you." And I shared it with her, and we were having a chat, and she said, "What do you think I am?" And I said, "Well, firstly, I can't do that because it's unethical, so I'm not going to do you know what I think you are, but please, if you want to share with me, share what you are." And what was funny in terms of her preferences, so the preferences are E and I, S and N, T and F, and J and P. So I just want it, so S and N, sensing and intuition, T and F, thinking and feeling, J and P, judging and perceiving. So I'm just going to go to T and F for a second. So there is an element at director level.
Yeah.
Usually you get fairly strong T's, fairly strong thinkers. And I had in my mind that she was an F because of the way she behaved.
Yeah.
So her behaviour was very very people focused. So much so that it was, you know, it was evident.
Yeah.
And actually when she took me through it, she was a T. So, and actually she was a very strong T. So again, this ties into her level in the organisation, very high up, very successful, very strong T. But what she'd learnt to do brilliantly was the F side. Now, as it happens, she was part of an engagement team, director of engagement, and so she needed that element for her role. So she'd learnt over years to really finesse that behaviour and flick between the two.
Brilliant.
Which I found fascinating.
Yeah.
So those sorts of things where you can learn that element of your behaviour and flex it is great, but what MBTI will do is also highlight that for you. Great. So it will say, actually, you might think I'm definitely an F because that's how I behave. If it's learned, it will highlight it by a number of things which we'll maybe talk about during the process section, but certainly the one-to-one feedback and team sessions that we've done, it very clearly will highlight when it's a learnt behaviour versus, just to go back to what we talked about at the top of the podcast, is a preference. So an innate preference based on when you are little, 2 and 3 years age, and it's inbuilt from then in, it's a different thing. I've learnt to do it over time. Actually, if I was to sit back and relax, this is fundamentally what I prefer.
Great. Brilliant. So you did just mention the process.
Yes.
And I think for me, when I did mine, it was a very interesting process in terms of the different stages. And I think probably for me, the biggest aha moment is it's not just about yourself. It's actually about understanding others. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. So again, this is another reason why I'm a big fan of Myers-Briggs. And we mentioned, there's loads of different tools out there, and they call them all different types of things. But this is another reason why I'm such a big fan of it. So the process for me, I quite like it in the first part of the process, and you'll know, Laura, is you get a questionnaire.
Yeah.
And usually nowadays, it's done online. So you go online and fill out the questionnaire. And again, to your point around, I'd fail at that. Is it a test? It's not. It's a questionnaire, and there's no right or wrong. So when I'm talking to people about, if I'm doing Myers-Briggs with a participant or a team, when I send them the questionnaire, I kind of send them a bit of blurb around, look, don't think about it too much.
Yeah.
Don't think about putting something that you think someone might want you to put. Or what you think might, other people might want to hear. There is no right or wrong, no type, and this is something that is really, I really try and get across during the sessions. no one type is better than the other.
Yeah.
No type is good or bad.
There's nothing you'd click and go, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have ticked that. You know, it's
Absolutely.
not that kind of a questionnaire.
Absolutely that, yeah. So there is no right or wrong, there is no good and bad, which is why, again, I don't like this kind of term assessment, because it suggests that...
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm not... As soon as I hear assessment, you think of your GCSEs, your A-levels,
Yeah,
your university
terrifying.
exams, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want that.
No,
Yeah.
and we're not assessing people, you know, no one has the right to do that. So
Yeah.
it's a questionnaire, there's no right or wrong, and actually your type is... It's not, you know, good or bad. It's all the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, I usually give a bit of blurb around when you're filling out the questionnaire, and it's just to avoid or try and avoid, because we can be influenced.
Yeah.
So I think the questionnaire takes, I mean, depending on which one we do, you know, I'd say about 15 minutes, half an hour, dependent. But I usually say, you know, fill it in, quiet time, fairly relaxed environment, somewhere you're comfortable. It can be at work, it can be in your office, it can be at home. But do try and be aware of your day. So often when I go into a session to set it up, I'll ask them where they filled out their questionnaire. So did they do it at the desk in an open plan office that was quite noisy? Or did they do it halfway through the day because they realised they hadn't done it and they needed to do it?
Yeah.
So all these things, just getting a feel for what could potentially impact their answers.
I'd never thought about the environment. Yeah.
So if you've had a stressful morning, and then, you know, your friendly MBTI practitioner drops you an email and says, "Hey Laura, I've still not received your questionnaire," and you go, "Oh, fine," and you frantically,
just do it, don't you? Yeah.
Exactly. So this could skew your results when we come to discuss them. But again, this is another reason why I love it. Even if that happens, it's highlighted through the process we go through.
Great.
So even if it is done, you know, in haste or under stress, or, you know, with your boss stood behind you going, "What are you writing?" You know, we can quite easily pick that apart and get to the crux of your preferences and your type. So I kind of always kind of caveat that first questionnaire piece with, you know, chill out, no right or wrong, do it in a nice and relaxed environment, and we'll go from there.
Great.
So that's the first part of the process. Second part is kind of, there's two options really. So, and again, I don't know what you did, Laura, but so we could do a one-to-one session. So like we are right now, you and I sit in a room, and what I would have would be a little kind of pack over here of, you know, magic things, where I would ask you like interview questions almost.
Yeah.
Around the preferences, to dig into your type a little bit more.
Okay.
What I never do, and again, I don't know if this is on one-to-one or on team feedback, what I never do is I don't give you the results of your questionnaire before.
Yes.
Because it will skew you. It will.
Oh, yeah.
You'll go, well, Sarah said I was a niece, so I should probably answer that as, you know, subconsciously you may well do that, and we don't want that. So I don't give you that. And this part I call the self-assessment. So actually it's kind of irrelevant what that report says.
Yeah.
It's more important that you decide.
Define it, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we would go through a series of questions on each of the types, and you would kind of say, do you know what, based on that conversation, Sarah, I think at this stage I'm going to say I'm an I.
Yeah.
And again, do you know what? It's flexible.
Yeah,
Definitely. If
yeah.
at the end or in 6 months you go, do you know what, I think I might have flitted it. I think I'm pushing towards an E, and we can have a conversation about that. This is not a, you know, I will brand you with that forever.
Yeah.
There's a flexibility element to it in that, you know, people change, circumstances change, behaviours are learned and indeed unlearned. So it will flex.
Yeah.
Usually not by much, if I'm honest. If you get it right, usually not by much at all. But certain things can impact that. So, you know, you would do the self-assessment, and then I would, at the end of that, on a one-to-one, share your questionnaire results with you. And you can either go, wow, spot on, or actually, I think those two areas are different.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, the great thing with Myers-Briggs is I can order you another report with that type on that gives you all the details of that type. So if you disagree and go, actually, do you know what, Sarah, I was a bit stressed that day and I think it skewed it, I can get you another report.
You can go change it, that's great.
Yeah. And then the third part of that process is a team session. So again, going back to when I've used this in previous lives, it's been, again, at a quite high level, but fundamentally for them to understand their team, their direct reports.
Yeah.
And we have, again, I'll set it up in a similar way in that they understand what Myers-Briggs is about, the right or wrong, put them at ease, nice and comfy cuddles, fluffy, all that good stuff. And then we'll go through a series of team exercises for each of their preferences.
Great.
So we'll do some really cool exercises on E&I and some really cool exercises on S&N. And actually they're designed to push you a little bit out of your comfort zone. You can see people kind of eyeing the room as they start to get a little bit more uneasy, because it does force out your preference. Yeah. Forces out what's true and highlights that learned behaviour.
And it also helps you to explain situations. So, in one of my old teams, I was looking at, I kind of didn't understand why someone needed their own time. And again, it's that introvert piece again. But there's other things like, I remember when I was doing the Myers-Briggs process, you see a big image and it's spot what you see. And it's a very interesting exercise because I very much was like, oh, there's this great landscape, it's got this going on, and I was very big picture. And the other person there's like a little mouse there, and they were spotting for detail. And what I've realised is, for me, I don't look for the detail, but somebody else is very much picking up on it. And it's actually, how can we work together to use those strengths? And for me, that was probably the biggest learning, that actually I can understand others through it as well.
Yeah, it's an excellent example, and I use that. So that's an activity for S&N.
Yes, yeah.
So for sensing and intuition, and again, there's words that we use today, but actually they don't mean what we believe them to mean. And I do exactly the same exercise, Laura, and I use I use an image from Salvador Dali.
Oh yes, it's the same one. Yeah, there we go.
And it's exactly that. So it's incredible to see. So I think the question is, have a look at the picture and capture what you see. Now, actually, that straight away, people take that to mean very different things, like you said. Yeah. Oh, the sky was, so I went dark and light. This was dark. This was light. Yeah. Some people on my sessions have drawn. They've actually drawn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so again, it's giving you a different dynamic.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you have the very, and there was this there and I saw that there, and it blows your mind, some of the detail that people can get to. And you're absolutely right, that big picture, that almost, fairly creative element of this and this, and what about blah.
It's more kind of a storytelling thing, isn't it, rather than kind of jumping in was like, kind of that game when you're playing when you're little, it's like, spot what misses off the tray. Somebody takes something off, then you look at it again. And they're thinking more from that. I was like, I need to spot as much as I can, and it's most detailed. Whereas I'm like, well, it's a big story and this going on, and it's a very interesting, different way of perceiving things.
Yeah, really good point. Yeah, some people do see it as and you can see them crazy scribbling.
The crazy writing. Yeah,
must write down everything that's in this picture before she turns it off. And I think you do. I gave like a 10-15 second time limit versus very. So I think when I did the exercise as a participant, the first thing I wrote was Dali. Yeah. And it's just that was just
that's your observation.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's very, and it is about understanding yourself and how you prefer to work. Like you say, your big picture, I'm also big picture. Yeah. And it's about how we can work with and utilise people who are, more detail orientated. Yeah. And pulling those two great things together, and flexing it when needed. And I think what's interesting on flex, so have you ever had to kind of sit in a very detailed state for a long period of time?
Yeah, because I can't do it. Yeah.
Right. Why can't you do it?
I think for me, I'm a very visual learner as well. So I get lost in the detail. I've got no interest in that. So I'm always thinking about, what can I create? What can I do next? How can I transform this into a bigger and better thing? And for me, getting that word right, or making this detail make sure that it's exactly what it is, that's not my strength. Yeah. And kind of bringing in the bulb side of it as well. Implement is probably my lowest score. So, and whereas my top one is the plant. So you can kind of those fit, and it's very interesting to put all these different preferences types together. But because I'm aware of that, I know when I'm writing a document, I'm very careful on the detail now, because I'm trying to work on that rather than just ignore it. And then use my plant to my strength, but then be aware that all these other things are going on as well.
Yeah.
So it's Get a bit off topic. Bring a Belbin in there.
We don't. No Belbin. It's a good insight in that I'm the same. You know, if I have to spend, you know, a decent amount of time in detail, and I don't know if you find it, but I find it quite tiring.
Yeah.
It tires me out. And this is the thing about when you flex your type a little bit too much, you feel. So a great example. So do you remember when you had an interview, your last interview?
Yeah.
If I asked you to recall that interview and your answers to those questions, or even the questions you were asked, could you?
No.
How long ago was it?
About a year.
Okay, so not that long ago.
Yeah.
So you couldn't recall it?
No, but I remember more things about... for me, the interview was very much, you know, sharing stories and being excited and passionate about it. But if you told me the details, no, there's no way.
Yeah. And so when you came out of the interview, do you remember how you felt?
Yeah, I felt great.
You felt great?
Yeah.
Did you feel relieved?
Did feel relieved, yeah. Again, because you're in that pressurised environment.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not comfortable in that either.
Yeah. And the other example is that people use, they usually use interviews or first date.
Okay.
Right? So, I can't remember the last time I went on a first date, but that first date act that you...
It is an act, yeah.
and it is, and forgive my term, but what you're fundamentally doing in those two situations is you're telling those people what you think, what you think they want to hear, which means you may be flexing your type.
Yeah.
And when you do that for a sustained period of time, it's exhausting. So you come out and you go, I don't know, I feel great, but I couldn't tell you what they asked me.
No.
Because I can't remember. Because you've been in that state too long. So this is, again, a kind of just a highlight. It's great to flex, but know, and again, it ties into self-awareness element of Myers-Briggs, know when you've been in it too long. So if you're starting to feel tired or stress, anxiety, those sorts of things mean you're in a type you don't not necessarily comfortable in, and you need to come back. And it's just recognising those areas. It's great to flex, it's great to feel, and you feel that kind of adrenaline.
Yeah, you do.
But you need to come back away from it.
Yeah.
And different elements will affect that. But usually the two examples I give are an interview and a first date, when you are definitely trying so desperately to give them...
Well, you're mirroring other people's behaviours as well. You know, it's not really your own preference.
Exactly. So yeah, it's great to flex, but... And if you are, you know, again, to that omnivert point again, ambivert, if you are sort of in the middle of the spectrum, then it's easy to kind of bob either side, and you're very lucky if you're in that situation.
Yes, yeah.
But if you are moving more towards a stronger preference, so you're moving more towards the, you know, the left or the right of the scale, you then imagine trying to pull yourself back to the other side can take a lot of effort and a lot of energy. So it's just, again, about well-being. You know, just be aware of it. Flex it is great, but just don't stay there too long.
Great. Okay, so I think final question to wrap up today's podcast is we've talked about MBTI as a tool for personal development, but also teams. Where else do you think it kind of works?
It works everywhere.
Magical tool. Yeah,
they're not paying me for this, but I think it's great. So self-awareness is brilliant for. I'm a big fan of the one-to-one feedback that we just talked about, because it allows people to really dig into it in a pretty safe environment, which I found really beneficial for self-awareness. Team building, it's great for team dynamics. I used it at director and board level, and two different ways. So kind of across as a senior leadership team, so how they work together.
Very interesting.
Yes, it was, and we'll probably leave that one there. But how they work together as a leadership team, but then how they work with their direct reports, so their individual teams. Yeah. And there was always very big eye openers there as well around, you know, if there was conflict, why you can start to see why that was occurring. And again, conflict management is another great one for it. Change management. There's Myers-Briggs and emotional intelligence. So there's you know, you could leadership. It's great for. I think all great leaders are self-aware. Just add that in. So you know,
there's an endless list.
There is, and there isn't exactly that. It's an endless list. So you know, I think understanding what it's about and what it's there to do can really benefit organisations, teams, their leadership, their SLT, and self-awareness. So, you know, I think it is. For me, like we've said, there's loads out there, loads of great stuff, but for me, Myers-Briggs is the one I am a biggest fan of.
Great. Perfect. So I think that concludes today's podcast. And if you'd like to find out any more information, do get in touch. So I've been Laura Ball, and this is Sarah Pregnell and Learning Development Partners at Nicholas Associates Consulting.